This is going to be a special video where we are going to scrutinize the train wreck of a vegan documentary called Christspiracy and what one of the creators of the documentary has said in supplementary videos and in an interview. Let's go to the central question of the documentary.
I heard a question I'd never heard before.
Is there a spiritual way to kill an animal? I'll put it this way. How would Jesus kill an animal?
Wow.
If by spiritual we mean relating to religion or religious belief, then of course there is going to be a spiritual way to kill an animal. They are aware of the biblical animal sacrifices and are aware of sacrificial religious customs, one of which they already mentioned in the documentary. They already know the answer on the question. But what about the second question? How would Jesus kill an animal? Jesus, as a God himself who can perform miracles, could easily and painlessly take a life of an animal just by willing it. The vegan who asked that question wasn't creative enough to think of that.
So this one that came up was related back to the how would Jesus kill an animal question. And some Christians have popped up and said, well, he wouldn't kill any animal, actually. He would just will the animal to death because he's God and they just serve themselves up for him. They'll die and then that's it. They just die. They give their lives. So what's your take on that?
Well, I think that's actually a great answer. And sure, fair enough. But can you do that? Can I do that? If we're trying to find the most Christ-like way, if you are a Christian and you want to be someone who's ethical, or you're asking yourself, what would Jesus do? Which is what I ask myself, I can't do that. Last time I checked, I can't just will an animal to death, to sleep or whatever. And so I feel that's while it's a fair answer to how would Jesus kill an animal, sure, go for it. But then how does that apply to me, or how does that apply to you? We can't do that. So, what's the next option?
That's moving the goalpost. The question wasn't, can you kill an animal in a way Jesus could kill an animal? But how would Jesus kill an animal? The central question of the documentary has essentially been answered. Secondly, Jesus had other people to do the killing. In the New Testament, we have two instances of Jesus intentionally causing fish to get caught into fishing nets, which are consequently killed by his disciples. Vegans believe that people kill animals just by purchasing things which contain animal body parts. By that logic, Jesus 100% killed animals by intentionally causing their deaths. And that leads us to the next point. Fish.
Oh, the fish stories, yes. Well, the problem with the fish stories about Jesus feeding the 5,000 and the 4,000, the earliest references describe the miracle of the loaves and the fishes as the miracle of the loaves without referencing the fishes at all. And in fact, even Jesus' own retelling, he says, don't you remember when I miraculously multiplied all the loaves? He doesn't mention the fish at all.
In these stories, the words used for fish are actually a mistranslation. Like the Greek ichthys, which is also a secret symbol for Jesus, and phosphagen, actually meaning a relish or anything eaten on bread. In another story in the Gospel of John, Jesus helps his disciples miraculously catch 153 fish, but then tells them to follow him and become fishers of men instead. Nearly the exact same story is told 500 years earlier by Pythagoras, where he wages a bet with some fishermen that if he's able to guess the number of fish in their nets, they must release them. They agree to the terms and are shocked when Pythagoras guesses the exact number of fish, and the exact number in the Jesus story, 153, is the ratio height of the Vesica Pisces. This symbol originated by Pythagoras, who was a lifelong vegetarian and fiercely against animal sacrifice.
This is called cherry picking. When we look at the context why Jesus only mentioned bread and not also fish, it makes sense. His disciples were confused why he mentioned yeast, so they thought Jesus was talking about bread and they didn't bring any, on which Jesus replied with mentioning bread and only bread. I will play a clip of a non-vegan who explains this very nicely.
Now the disciples crossed to the other side and forgot to take bread along. Jesus said to them, "Keep your eyes open and watch out for the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." So here's the context. Jesus is using leaven, the stuff that makes bread rise, as an object lesson. That scripture continues, so they began to reason among themselves, saying, we did not take any loaves along. Well, why don't the disciples refer to fish here? Because there's no leaven in fish, and Jesus didn't mention the fish. Well, knowing this, Jesus said, why are you discussing among yourselves that you have no loaves, you with little faith? Did you not yet see the point? Or do you not remember the 5 loaves in the case of the 5,000 and how many baskets you took up? Or the 7 loaves in the case of the 4,000 and how many large baskets you took up? So why doesn't Jesus refer to fish right here? Well, why would he? The fish have nothing to do with his object lesson, which he clarifies for his disciples in the next verse. How is it that you do not discern that I did not speak to you about bread, but watch out for the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees? Then they grasped what he said, to watch out, not for the leaven of bread, but for the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees.
In the supplementary video on their YouTube channel, they released a video about fish and they dishonestly cherry-picked Bible verses so they could paint a picture that there was only bread. In the same video, he made a point that miraculous catch of fish is not legit because 3 Gospels didn't include it.
And in John's Gospel, when Jesus calls his first followers, no mention of even a boat. 3 out of 4 Gospels skip it. If it really happened, why did Mark, Matthew, and John leave the blockbuster on the cutting room floor? Red flag or red herring?
And by that, he's contradicting himself, because the multiplication of fish is included in all 4 Gospels, but he still believes that it's not legit. It's either one or the other. He cannot have it both ways. When we go back to the Christspiracy documentary, we can see they're also ignoring the context of the whole fishing situation. Let's listen to the same non-vegan from before.
The concoction that this word referred to was a relish traditionally made with fish and spread over bread. And so in time, the word came to simply mean fish by Jesus' day. Now, imagine you are a translator, and let's take a look at this word, relish, in context, okay? So, we have John 21:9 says, when they came ashore, they saw there a charcoal fire with fish lying on it and bread. Now, the word here for fish is opserion in classical Greek, and this could be translated as relish, but the same word is actually used in the very next verse. So think about the context. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish, asperion, you just now caught. Obviously, friends, they were not out at sea catching relish off the side of the boat, were they?
This is a page Christspiracy creators provided as a source. And right there you can see Jesus ask them, have they caught fish? It would make no sense to ask them, have they caught cooked relish with fishing nets in a boat? Then, after Jesus told them where to cast nets, the word being used means the actual fish. The same word was used again. Then we have the word which may be fish or relish. And then Jesus told them to bring some of that what they caught, as we already know is actual fish, and the word which was used mean literally fish. When we look at the context, it cannot possibly be a relish and not be fish. Even their own sources prove them wrong when there is context. Do you remember what they said about this? Let's listen again.
In another story in the Gospel of John, Jesus helps his disciples miraculously catch 153 fish, but then tells them to follow him and become fishers of men instead. Nearly the exact same story is told 500 years earlier by Pythagoras, where he wages a bet with some fishermen that if he's able to guess the number of fish in their nets, they must release them. They agree to the terms and are shocked when Pythagoras guesses the exact number of fish. And the exact number in the Jesus story, 153, is the ratio height of the Vesica Pisces. This symbol originated by Pythagoras, who was a lifelong vegetarian and fiercely against animal sacrifice.
But that's not nearly the exact story. A lot of things there are different. The only element which is shared between the two is that some wise men are talking with fishermen. Secondly, the Pythagoras story dates to like 2nd or 3rd century. Also, correlation doesn't necessarily mean there is causation. This whole part reeks of a conspiracy theory. In the supplementary video, they explain what they mean, and it's hilarious.
When you map the ancient Vesica Pisces, the intersecting circles forming the ichthus symbol, the width to height ratio comes out to about 265 to 153, an extremely close approximation to the square root of 3, a ratio sacred to Pythagoreans who revered the Vesica geometry and triangular harmonies. Even Augustine, yes, St. Augustine, later noted that 153 was a triangular number, symbolizing completeness and unity of all the faithful. Yet, Wes laughed this off in the debate like finding the speed of light in the Bible.
Numerology really doesn't go very far with me because you can extrapolate numbers to the speed of light.
But this isn't just some wild speculation or conspiracy theory to write off. You've got triangular numbers, Pythagorean sacred geometry, the ichthus acronym, and the Vesica symbol, all packed into one scene right down to the square root. What are the odds of that just happening by chance? Trillions to one.
Trillions to one.
In this particular clip, he goes on a tangent about fishing for 3 minutes. I'm going to summarize his point. He is framing the narrative that Jesus was against fishing, and that's why he said he would make his disciples fishermen of men instead of fish. And after Jesus died, his disciples lost their way and they went back fishing fish. But there is nothing to support that narrative. He thinks Jesus calling them to be fishermen of men is a declaration that they should not fish actual fish, ever. I have no idea how is that even implied. That also doesn't add up with all of the evidence we have, and it doesn't make any sense to help them do 2 times what Jesus doesn't want them to do. From killing fish, we're moving to killing pigs. Let's hear what he has to say.
He killed 2,000 pigs, they say. Jesus killed 2,000 pigs. Because the story is that there was a man who was possessed and a legion of demons inside him. And then Jesus did what I suppose would be an exorcism. And those demons begged to not be killed or whatever. So he said, okay, then fine, I'll send you into those pigs. And then those pigs ran off a cliff and drowned. And so people shorten that to, didn't Jesus kill 2,000 pigs? And
Right.
So how could he be against, hurting animals? That's the other one.
Yeah, and people often say that, how would Jesus kill an animal? Well, he would kill him like he killed those pigs,
Yeah, that one, yeah.
But this is another just great example all throughout the scripture where we'll see that the average person, and I was one of them for a long time. That's why I didn't know this until I just opened my eyes and started really reading the text critically. We read things into the text that aren't there. And that's what a lot of people will accuse me of doing and accuse people that go down this path. Oh, you're reading things in the text. Well, actually, funny enough, it's usually the reverse. So that story, people say, oh, Jesus sent the demons and the pigs. Well, no, he didn't. If you actually read the text, the demons are begging to be sent into the pigs, or they're begging to be cast out. People are begging for the demons to be cast out. They don't want to be. They want to stay in the human, but people are begging like, hey, we gotta heal this demon possessed man. And then Jesus, he just says, go. That's all he says. He doesn't say go to the pigs, damn you pigs or something like that. He just says,
Right.
Go. He says, be gone. Then the demons are cast out and choose the pigs, and the pigs run off into the cliff.
There are 3 accounts of that event, and he's talking only about Matthew, while ignoring the others. In Mark, it was explicitly stated that Jesus permitted the demons to possess pigs. The same is true for Luke. He could have ordered them into, quote-unquote, the abyss, but he didn't. He took pity on demons over pigs, and he intentionally allowed the demons to torment and kill pigs. Let's now look at Matthew. As we can see, it isn't explicitly stated that Jesus gave them the permission, But it is pretty much obvious that he did. Jesus was driving them out, so demons begged him to send them into pigs. That implies Jesus was in control where the demons could go. By telling them, go, he is permitting demons, or in other words, he is sending demons into the herd of pigs. Look, if I kill animals just because I buy a hamburger, then Jesus 100% kills pigs by permitting torment and death of pigs. He's either trying to deceive us or he doesn't know what he's talking about. Whichever is the case, it's bad. But let's move on.
People often say, but Andrew, human beings are made in the image of God and they're given dominion.
And God said, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock.
Dominion is power to control or dispose of at your discretion.
Because God has given us dominion over the earth and over all the beasts of the earth. They're ours to do it as we see fit.
Yet, researching Dominion's original translation, we were surprised to learn that Dominion actually means to serve in stewardship for others, as God does over us or as parents do with their children.
So the word that's been used is stewardship, being the leader, the guide, the superintendent in a responsible way.
Dominion simply means that we have a responsibility to look after the created order. In other words, we are the servant species, not the master species.
I will first show a clip of Inspiring Philosophy's video.
After a close study of these verses, it will be shown that notions of vegetarianism and animal peace do not arise from the text itself. Instead, humankind's call to subdue and rule in Genesis 1:28-30 indicates the presence of some form of strife and most likely allows the use of animals as a food source. Thus, these texts align with the general view seen elsewhere in the biblical record. Eating meat is a blessing. The first word for subdue occurs 13 other times in the Bible. In 6 instances, it refers to war conquest of hostile lands. 5 times, it refers to enslavement. Once it is used as a locution for sexual assault, and 1 other time it refers to trampling underfoot. The second word for rule is also very harsh. Van E notes that throughout the Bible, the word is not used for someone ruling over his own people, unless that role involves some sort of oppression or injustice. The connotations of the word refers to a rulership, where those that are being ruled over end up in an unpleasant situation. In other words, the end game for animals is not a pleasant one, resulting in enslavement and death. As Van E says, they focus on gaining and exerting authority over another, a call to conquest and dominion. In them, humans are granted permission to use animals for their purposes.
And if you look at the meaning of the word, it reflects what we just heard: to rule, dominate, tread down, subjugate. In the Old Testament, God doesn't have issues when people sacrifice animals. In fact, burnt offerings had pleasant aroma. But we also have a logical problem. Either we are only stewards of animals and nothing else, or we are stewards of all God's creation on earth, which includes plants. If it's the latter, which seems to be the case, then vegan Christians have a problem, because they are all in favor of dominating, killing, and destroying things like plants instead of being stewards of it. We also have this problem: crop and other kind of animal deaths. It would be really weird to be a steward of animals and also to have permission to indiscriminately kill them when prioritizing your own needs and desires. This whole stewardship doesn't make any sense. The biggest point of the documentary was that Jesus was killed because he supposedly was against animal killing. So let's see how the documentary presents that.
He's in Jerusalem for the final few days of his earthly life, but it's quite unusual for him to go off at the deep end, so to speak, like this. And it's like he's going, okay, now I can really show you who I am, and let rip, and creates havoc and says, this is my Father's house, it should be a house of prayer for all nations, but you have turned it into a den of robbers.
So we've heard he called them thieves, and now you're saying robbers.
So what is the real Hebrew translation for what Jesus called the priests in the temple?
Right, let me have a look and see where it comes and what exactly it says. Paritz. Yeah, so that's interesting. Yes, I never realised that. That's a kind of aha moment. Yes.
And what does the word
Paritz mean?
define
Another book. Paritz. Well, we'll have to look up Paritz in the Hebrew dictionary as well. Paritz, yes. A violent one.
And that's what he called the priests doing the sacrifice?
Yeah.
So it's the killing then.
It's ferocious, apparently.
The first thing I want to note is their dishonesty. They know very well that cleansing of the temple was done because of trading. We have it written in the 4 Gospels, but in the documentary, they specifically asked.
And that's what he called the priests doing the sacrifice?
Yeah.
And that's false. Jesus wasn't saying anything to priests. He was saying it to the traders. They are fabricating things so they could push their narrative. Let's now deal with the supposed violent ones. Their point is that Jesus was referencing Jeremiah 7th, 11th verse, which is supposedly about violent people like killers or murderers. But Jeremiah doesn't reference just murder when talking about those who are quote-unquote violent. Stealing, committing adultery, perjury, burning incense to another god, and following other gods are also referenced, even though none of that is violent or murder. If Jesus was referencing what is in Jeremiah, then it logically follows Jesus was also referencing non-violent things, which could very easily include trade in the temple as possible theft. And that mirrors the information given to us in the Gospels. They lost the strongest argument they had for this. Jesus also never said anything against eating animals. If that was so important to him, he would have said something, right? Cameron might say that's argument from silence.
That's what people say. Well, if Jesus or if anyone in the scripture was against eating meat, then why didn't he just say it? Why didn't he just outright say it? Why is it not a command? Well, I think that, there is an argument from silence there, and a lot of people don't like arguments from silence. And part of that is because I do think we have a history in 2,000 years worth of a dominant society like the Roman Empire, for instance, where Christianity first spread, where there was a lot of heavy meat eating. And it's not so far-fetched to believe that maybe there were aspects of that particular part of the story that were suppressed. But when Christ says things like, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, which he did say in the scripture very bluntly. And the word is, I desire mercy, not velo is the word, not never sacrifice. I never desired sacrifice. Well, in that day and age, sacrifice was typically the way that you got meat. So in a way, it is condemning that, just by saying like, hey, we shouldn't be doing this. And the end result would be meat eating.
I have 3 points to make. Firstly, we do have biblical evidence of Jesus being vocal about things he doesn't like. We have evidence of him explicitly scolding and criticizing people who did something he thinks is wrong. We have evidence of him performing miracles which leads to eating animals. It would stand to reason if a person like that is strongly against animal eating, he would have been vocal about it. That's not argument from silence, that's actually an argument based on evidence. The second point is that he's trying to make a conspiracy theory, which is something like, people ate meat, so maybe they suppressed what Jesus has said because they loved to eat meat so much. It's just damage control on his part. The third point is the I desire mercy, not sacrifice. He's talking about these 2 situations. And as you can see, when we have context, we can clearly see it has nothing to do with animals or animal sacrifice whatsoever. For some reason, the creators of the documentary are allergic to context. In the supplementary video, Cameron noted that Jesus was quoting Hosea.
Jesus twice echoed this, quoting Hosea, I desire mercy, not sacrifice.
But again, he's being allergic to context. Hosea is telling us that God prioritizes something over hollow rituals and superficial social norms, which reflects what we see in Matthew. In both instances, Pharisees criticized either Jesus or his disciples for doing something which is not customary or socially accepted to be done, on which then Jesus quotes Hosea. It has nothing to do with animals whatsoever. He also said velo means never, like never desiring sacrifice, but that's not what I found. It just means negation, like no or not. Let's move on. There is also information about Passover which isn't correct.
All of the sacrificed animals were barbecued on the altars and sold by priests for meat.
Meat wasn't sold to people after the sacrifice. A household needed to offer a living lamb which they either had or bought. Afterwards, meat belongs to them because it was their lamb. That information can be even found as their own source, which they posted on the Christspiracy website. Let's now address their claims about a handful of apostles being vegetarians and about Nazarenes.
Matthew is recorded as being a vegetarian. Yes. Peter is recorded as being a vegetarian. Epiphanius records that the whole Nazarene movement in the 4th century were vegetarian. And when Epiphanius talked to one of the Nazarenes personally, that Nazarene said to the question from Epiphanius, "Why are you a vegetarian?" the Nazarene responded, "Because Jesus taught us to be vegetarians."
First they mention Matthew, and the source was Clement of Alexandria. But if you read through it, you can see that he doesn't write about vegetarianism or that eating animals is sinful. He writes about the virtues of moderation and that Christians shouldn't irrationally indulge certain things. When talking about Peter, they gave source of Clementine homilies, which just happens to be a late 3rd century document. Definitely not written by Clement of Rome. It is unknown who wrote it. Even if we are to assume that John was eating only olives and bread, from that it doesn't follow that Jesus didn't eat meat or that Christians shouldn't eat meat. And when talking about John, the source they provided is a 4th century document which doesn't even contain that quote. But even if I'm to grant that all of them didn't eat any meat, from that it doesn't follow that eating meat is forbidden or sinful or that Jesus was preaching that. It proves nothing. Before we talk about Nazarenes, we have to listen to the claim the documentary made about Apostle Paul and Jesus' brother James.
What we do know is that Paul was fiercely anti-vegetarian, and his influence has undoubtedly influenced the direction of Christianity, and especially during the 1st century.
St. Paul is a Roman leader who spread Christianity to the masses, encouraged converts to eat meat, condemning the movement that didn't. Funny, many people don't know that Jesus had a brother James. And why is that?
We have all of these additional sources. The main thing is his lifestyle. He doesn't eat meat. He lived off what grew of itself.
James, the brother of Jesus, was clearly a vegetarian, and he was head of the Jerusalem church.
Nazarenes was a 1st century Jewish Christian sect. They were known by that name before they were known as Christians, and they still followed the Mosaic law. James, brother of Jesus, was one of them, yes, but he still followed the Jewish traditions, which would most likely include, for one example, eating Passover lamb. In Acts 21, we see James recommend to Paul to respect the law, which included sacrificing animals, probably because the vow they're talking about was what we can see in Numbers 6. The documentary ignores all of that, either by design or out of ignorance. We also have a book from Epiphanius, a 4th century church father who wrote about sects and heresies. And in his book, he explicitly told us that there was a sect called Nazarenes before Jesus, but the two were not connected.
There are lost gospels that we have reference to. One of them we actually do bring up in the film. It's the gospel of the Ebionites, which Ebionite just is poor, the poor ones in Hebrew.
Right. Well, that gospel is from the 2nd century, written decades later after the canonized Gospels are written. Telling us that there is some Gospel which was written later doesn't mean anything. They have to argue for its credibility, which they aren't doing.
And they were known to follow James the Just, Jesus' brother. And there is a Hebrew or an Aramaic Gospel of Matthew that they carry around, which we don't have anymore, but we know that we had it because critics of them in the Orthodox and Roman Catholic, tradition, Epiphanius, the particular one, he references this gospel, and he says that in their gospel, it says that Jesus specifically rejects the Passover lamb. He says, "I have no desire to eat this Passover lamb with you." So he's rejecting it.
Right. He's referencing a reference to a gospel we don't have. Again, that means nothing. We cannot verify anything. He also mentioned that critics of the lost gospel referenced it. That means there were possible valid reasons to reject it.
And what's interesting about that is it does match the scripture, because in the scripture, there's another verse that's similar where it says, "I do not desire to again eat this Passover until the kingdom of heaven comes." That's basically what he says. But this is another one of those examples where the word "again," if you look at it online anywhere in any lexicon, it's in brackets because the word "again" is added. Right. Or it never said again. And it was added there to make it seem like, oh, he had eaten it before. I don't desire to again eat this, right. When it just says, "I don't desire to eat this." So
he seems to be talking about Luke. Just like before, he's ignoring the context. He gave us half of the sentence and he butchered it. It can be clearly seen that he isn't refusing to eat that Passover. He wants to. What he's saying is that it's going to be the last one until some point. But let's move on with this disaster.
Anyhow, there's that, which we discussed in the film. But interestingly, one piece that we didn't discuss in the film is there is a Syriac gospel of Luke, which is basically an Aramaic-like version of the Gospel of Luke that's been preserved, that says this. It's a very famous verse that normally says, don't let your heart be weighed down by these different sins or these different kinds of desires. And what he says is, "Now beware in yourselves that your hearts do not become heavy or hardened with the eating of flesh and with the intoxication of wine and with the anxiety of the world." So that's literally in this. Again, Jesus spoke in Aramaic, Syriac Aramaic. There's a link there. Anyone can look this up. The gospel is called the Evangelion de Marafesh. Okay. And why is that one different? Why is that one different than the one that we have in the canonized version of the scripture? That's what I would raise.
He's talking about this verse, but the gospel is from the late 2nd century, translated from Greek to Syriac. It is most likely a mistranslation. I mean, just a little bit later he gave them wine to drink. Why would he give them the very thing he wants them not to consume? It doesn't make any sense. When it comes to Jesus eating lamb, in the supplementary video he makes an argument from silence, and he, once again, ignores context.
Some say, of course Jesus ate the Passover lamb. It's one of our most common objections to Christspiracy. But nowhere, not once, in any gospel does it say he ate lamb. Bread is mentioned, wine is mentioned, but the lamb, it's never mentioned. Maybe that silence is the loudest message of all. So why did Jesus lift up bread and wine then? According to many scholars, including Christian theologian Bruce Chilton, it wasn't just symbolic, it was a substitutional ritual protest. Not the flesh of a lamb, but bread. Not the blood of a sacrifice, but the fruit of the vine. And even in Old English, bread was often referred to as meat, and Deuteronomy refers to the blood of grapes. These foods at the Last Supper weren't just a gentle metaphor, it was a bold reversal. The lamb was gone on purpose.
Guess what? Gospels also don't explicitly state they ate unleavened bread, but we all know, understanding the context of the event, that they were eating it. They don't have to explicitly state something which is obvious. The same logic would apply to eating lamb. Secondly, when we look at the text about the Passover and the Last Supper, we can see that in two of them it was explicitly stated that the lambs are getting slaughtered for the Passover, where right after that information, Jesus sent his disciples to make preparations to eat the Passover. They told us what is included in the Passover, and then they told us they prepared the Passover. In context, it makes perfect sense. And for the end, I want to show this clip.
I feel that when you lay out all of the evidence that we have, scripturally and historically, we have a lot of evidence historically as well. If he was on a stand and it was a jury had to condemn him as being guilty of being, or should I say, of being innocent of killing and eating animals or not, he would be declared innocent beyond all reasonable doubt. That's what I'll say. You know, it's so hard. I can't, for someone that lived 2,000 years ago and we've got such limited documentation on it and so many differing opinions, it's like, it would be, I think, really over the top for me to say absolutely 100% without a shadow of a doubt, because then it would just be silly. But I do feel with the evidence, it's undeniable for me.
But what evidence? His evidence are fabrications, misrepresentations, cherry picking, wishful thinking, begging the question, ignoring the context, so on and so forth. It's the opposite of having evidence. He starts from his conclusion and then he grasps at anything which could support his narrative. It's intellectually dishonest.